Thank you, thank you. All right, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Always enjoy coming here. You guys got a good pastor and a great church, and you've been sponsoring us for, boy, I would say about 22 years now. So in May of last year, my wife and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. And we also celebrated 40 years of ministry because we went into ministry just a couple months after we got married. And it's been quite a ride. We started our ministry in the Dominican Republic. Can you hit the next slide? There we go. Sometimes it freezes up and... Okay, so we started our ministry in the Dominican Republic, which is an island in the Caribbean. And we went there just 2 months after we were married. And when we got there, we found out that they were getting ready to start a residential Bible college. And I feel like it was divine providence that brought us there to be missionary educators. I wasn't sure what type of missionary I wanted to be. I just knew I wanted to be on the mission field. And the Lord opened a door for us to get plugged into this Bible college. And the director of the school, Andres Rincon, who was a Dominican, he taught us the nuts and bolts of how to get a Bible college up and running, and how to pick the curriculum, and how to recruit students, and the whole 9 yards. And we didn't realize at the time that the Lord was preparing us for our future ministry, working with Bible colleges in South America. While we were there in the Dominican, we planted a church, and we were able to buy land and purchase property, and we left 8 years later with a pretty healthy congregation. So we feel like our time in the Dominican was foundational for us because we learned how to start Bible colleges, how to plant churches, and we're training church planters. So it was like, wow, how the Lord worked all that out. Of course, we had no idea that that's what was happening. But looking back, we're like, wow, the Lord was definitely directing our paths. Probably the most important thing that happened while we were in the Dominican Republic is that both of our daughters were conceived and born there. And I like to tell people they were probably conceived on a rainy day because it was very hot there. But very special daughters, and they're got dual citizenship. They're Dominican American. And then after 8 years there, we went to Virginia so that I could start working on a master's degree. And we stayed in Virginia for 9 years. We worked as associate pastors for a large church that was very missions-minded. So we learned more about missions. Our passion for missions increased. And then we also planted another church while we were in Virginia. Out of that church, we planted a Hispanic church. And during our time in Virginia, our daughters grew from young children to beautiful young ladies. Okay, and then just around the time I finished up my master's degree, in ministerial preparation, I was invited on a short-term missions trip to Peru to teach a group of pastors. And while I was there, it was a 10-day trip. The Lord just burdened my heart that I learned the statistic that 90% of the pastors in Peru have no formal ministerial training. And that just, I was like, wow, and I got a master's degree in ministerial development. This is perfect. And so we moved to Peru 25 years ago this year. In May, it'll be 25 years. So we were in Peru for 9 years, and we were appointed as directors of the Bible College there. But when we arrived, we learned that the Bible College had been closed down for 7 years. They left out that little small detail when they talked to us about coming there to run the Bible College. So we ended up having to, and the facility that they had that you can see right here up in the top left corner was built back in Hitler's time. So it had been closed down for 7 years, so it was just completely falling apart. We had to do all kinds of remodeling there. But we were in that facility for 4 years, and then YWEA raised the money to, which is a kind of a missions youth thing where they raise money in the Church of God, the youth. And that's actually where I got connected with your pastor, because he was a state youth director at that time, and he came to Peru, saw our facility, got connected, and they ended up helping us build this new facility in a much nicer part of Lima. So we were there our last 5 years in Peru, and my wife and I learned in Peru this is what we're wired for. We enjoyed being missionaries in the Dominican Republic. We enjoyed our time pastoring in the States and the church plants that we did. But in Peru, it dawned on us, this is what we were born for, to train young men and women called into ministry. And we just love it. We love teaching these students, preparing them for ministry. Phyllis and I met in Bible college. We got married 3 weeks after I graduated. So we encourage our students, man, if you're called into ministry, why not marry someone who's got your same burden, your same passion, your same training? And so we've officiated the weddings of dozens and dozens of our students through the years. And then we get to dedicate their babies. We get to visit them on the field and see them excelling in ministry. And we love this part also. All right? This year, after 25 years, this is the first year that we have 2 students that are children of our graduates. Shows you how long we've been there. They're top-notch. Their parents were top-notch students, and they've been in ministry all these years. One of them now is an overseer, like the equivalent to like a state overseer here in the States. He's an overseer of a region of Peru. And the cool thing is their daughters are light years ahead of where they were when they started studying. And so if their parents have grown that much in ministry, imagine the impact their daughters are going to make. So that's exciting. Incidentally, let me go back and just tell you, we used to get them Christmas presents. My wife and I always had a heart for our graduates' children, and we would get them Christmas presents, hoping that one day the Lord would use that to spark an interest in ministry and all. And sure enough, they're at the Bible college, and one of the first things they told me is, I remember when you got us Christmas presents. I was like, beautiful, my plan worked. So during our time in Peru, we had 6 graduating classes. Remember, it's a 3-year program, so it took us 3 years to have our first graduating class, and then we had 6 more, 150 graduates from there, and 30 churches that were planted by our graduates all over Peru, some of them in Lima, some of them in other cities, and one, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, in a Shipibo village. One of our Shipibo students, our very first Shipibo student, Kelly, incidentally, I'm wearing this shirt in honor of her. It's a Shipibo shirt. And she studied with us and went back to her Shipibo village and planted a church there. And from that church, we've had several other Shipibo students. In fact, right now at the Bible College, there are 2 Shipibo students out of that congregation. So how cool is that? All right? And probably what's most moving for me about our time in Peru was I got to see my wife just excelling in ministry. When we were in the Dominican, she was in full-time ministry and good at it, but we were newly married, and I never dawned on me how gifted she was. While we were in the States, she was working a secular job, and I was doing ministry, and she was helping out. But when we went to Peru, she was back in full-time ministry, and it didn't take more than a month or 2 for me to realize, wow, this is where my wife needs to be in full-time ministry. She's such a gifted minister. She's a tremendously gifted administrator. She's the brains behind our entire operation. And she's also a very gifted worship leader. So a lot of our church plants that didn't have a worship team in the beginning, she would lead worship for them until they were able to win enough people and start a worship team and what have you. So very important part of the ministry. Okay, just this last year, somebody asked me, it was Randall Paris, one of the great youth pastors in the Church of God. He came and was teaching a class for us, and he's walking around campus, and my wife wasn't there that week. And he said, Wayne, man, I'm seeing all this, what's done here. What part does your wife play? What part does Phyllis play in helping you with the ministry here? And I was like, dude, you are asking the wrong question. What you should be asking is, what part do I play in helping her with the ministry? Because she really is top notch. And while we were in Peru, our daughters did high school. Maritza, our oldest, was just getting ready to start high school when we moved to Peru, and she ended up, they both finished college while we were there. Just around the time we were leaving Peru, they were graduating from college. And my wife likes to point out in this picture that they got some of my wild side. All right. Then we were asked by the Church of God to go to Colombia. The Church of God leadership in Colombia learned about the Bible college in Peru, and they're like, man, we need a Bible college like this to train church planters. And so they contacted World Missions and said, can you send us a couple of Americans to help us get a Bible college like they have in Peru? So World Missions contacted us and asked if we would be willing to go there. And we prayed about it. We went to Colombia. We were there for 11 years. And this is our baby. There was no Bible college there. We started at ground zero. We rented a facility. This was our first rented facility with the first group of students, great group of students. Every one of them are in full-time ministry today. That's pretty cool. Last year we had our 10-year class reunion with the first students, and every one of them are in full-time ministry. 10 years later. That's pretty cool. So we're betting 1,000 in Colombia. And then we outgrew that facility. So this was the second rented facility that we rented the second year. And then the third year, this was a larger, pretty nice sized building that we rented. And each time we rented a new facility, we were pouring $10,000 to $12,000 to get in it remodeled the way that we wanted it. And then at the end of the year, when we'd move, we'd bless the landlord with all those improvements. And so we started praying, man, God, we want to start investing in our own place. And the Lord opened a door for us to purchase an old chicken farm. We actually got a loan from the World Missions Department. And then the Church of God in Virginia helped us pay off that loan. And we purchased this old chicken farm. Those were former chicken coops that we remodeled into a beautiful chicken farm. And if I can just get sidetracked for a second, tell you a little story. I had a pastor in this area who was looking at all these different farms for us, looking for a place for us to buy. There were several retreat centers in this area, and we were looking at them and trying to find a good price and what have you. And he pointed this place out to me, and I went there with him and looked at it. And it had bbeen closed down for quite a few years. It was chicken. I didn't even go into the chicken coops. I'm like, they're chicken coops. We're starting a Bible college, not a chicken farm. And so, and in the house up in the top corner there that you see, she was keeping stuff from back in the 50s, so much junk and everything. I was like, nah, way too much work. We don't want this place. And I went home and I told my wife, sweetheart, you don't even worry about that place because it's no good. Now, she likes riding a motorcycle, and one day she was on her motorcycle and was kind of near, and so she said, let me go take a look at that place. She came back home, and she's like, sweetheart, did you go into those chicken coops? Did you see how big they were? Did you see that we could remodel those into multi-purpose buildings? Did you see the view? That would be a perfect place for Bible college, and it's in our price range and everything. I was like, well, yeah, if you put it that way, yeah. So anyway, today we've got a top-notch campus. And so during our time there, we had 7 graduating classes, 80 graduates, and most of them are still serving in full-time ministry. 30 more churches were planted in Colombia while we were there. And at the same time, churches were being planted in Peru, and some of the churches were planting daughter churches, so the number of churches kept increasing. And while we were in Colombia, both of our daughters got married and each of them gave us 2 handsome grandsons. So we've got four grandsons, and we just found out on New Year's Day that our daughter is expecting again, our oldest daughter, Maritza. So we're praying for a granddaughter this time. All right? And then 5 years ago, one of our graduates in Peru was getting married, and he wanted me to come and officiate his wedding. And he's like a son to me, so I went back to Peru to officiate the wedding. And the overseer there asked me, Wayne, can you come back and help us? We really need your help with the Bible college. It's not doing as nice as it was before and all, and we had learned that it actually closed down again. And so we prayed about it and thought, well, let's do it. And what ended up, we were originally planning on just going back to Peru and serving in Peru, but they wanted to make us regional directors of the 2 schools. So now we're working with both schools in Peru and Colombia. So now we're living in Peru, but traveling back and forth to Colombia. We go there several times a year and teach there, and we've got a director of the school there that's doing a fantastic job, and we're training somebody to take our place in Peru and eventually turn it over to him. But so far, we've had 300 graduates out of our 2 programs, and last year, Christian and Wendy, they're 2 of our graduates, they planted our 110th church, which means that there are 110 churches in South America that were planted by our graduates, and we're very thankful for that. And incidentally, I'd like to let you know we never dreamed of this. We never would have dreamed that this would have been possible. If you'd have told me 25 years ago that we'd have 2 Bible colleges up and running with 300 graduates and 110 churches, I would have told you, you're out of your mind. There's no way. And yet it happened. And so it's been very exciting, and we're at a very just fun time of our ministry because we travel around all over Peru and all over Colombia, and wherever we go, we've got graduates. In July, we made a motorcycle trip, went to 13 different towns, and ran into 20-some of our graduates pastoring, and we were able to meet with them, encourage them, pray with them, give them an offering, see their children and all. And believe it or not, we ran into 4 Waynes on that trip. 4 Waynes, and that's not a very common name in Latin America. 4 of our students named their kids after me, and I thought, wow, you're impacting their life when they name their kids after you. All right, so I want to just remind you that your support to us helps keep 2 Bible colleges operational, and we appreciate so much your partnership with us year after year. You guys are given somewhere in the ballpark of $4,000 to $8,000 a year towards our ministry. So he told me you guys are going to be receiving an offering later on. I think that's great, but more than the offering, I'd just like you to remember us throughout the year. We're 2 of the missionaries that you guys are supporting regularly, and so whenever you want to give to missions or give to the Bible colleges, put it in your envelope and mark it the Bible colleges in South America, or mark it the Wozniaks. If you forget our name, just put South American missionaries, and your church knows exactly how to get that to us, okay? All right, and so we appreciate so much our partnership with New Harvest. I wish I could remember exactly when it started, but I know it's been over 20 years because I think I met Robert after about 2 or 3 years there. So, well, basically, however long he's been pastoring here, that's how long you guys been supporting us, because I think as soon as he took on the church here to pastor it the 2nd time, they started supporting us. So a good 20 years, and we appreciate that, okay? Now, I wanted to just kind of switch gears and share with you about some fun things that missionaries get to do. And just so you know, I'm not the smartest man on the planet, but I do know the S goes up there. When you convert it from one program to another, sometimes it gets it out of whack. So don't be thinking, boy, that dumb missionary doesn't even know how to spell missionary. So that's my sister Geraldine, and we're at a place called Sacsayhuaman. And that stone that we're up against is about the size of a garage. A one-car garage. That stone is so heavy that the largest crane in Peru, and they've got some tons of buildings going on and humongous cranes, the largest crane in Peru can't even lift that stone. We can't even lift it. And the Inca builder 600 years ago drug it from a rock quarry 7 miles uphill and put it in place here, and it looks like it was cut with a laser beam. They're not just like all rectangular stones like we would do. They're all different shapes, and it makes it more earthquake resistant. and we got to tour that. So I want to just share with you some of the fun things that missionaries get to do. And I like to share this because some people think, oh, you're a missionary, you must be, oh, the sacrifice. Thank you for that sacrifice you make. And we really don't see ourselves as sacrifice, and we love what we're doing, okay? Maybe I shouldn't tell you that because I don't want you to be like, oh, man. But I would like you to see that we get to do a lot of fun things and special things. So one, we get to travel a lot. During our 25 years in South America, we've been to every country in Latin America except Paraguay. So Paraguay is the only place we haven't been, and we've been invited to teach at the different Bible college. So I've been able to teach, of course, in Peru and Colombia, but I've also been invited to teach at the Bible college in Venezuela, in Uruguay, in Argentina, so we've had opportunities. Plus, in the States, when I do fundraising, when we first left, we had churches that were supporting us in Virginia and North Carolina, and one in Pennsylvania. Now we've got churches in Georgia, we've got churches in South Carolina, we've got churches in Florida, we've got churches in California, Illinois, Indiana, and at one time we even had some in Alaska. So I've been able to travel all around the United States and visit churches. So that, to me, is fun. Peru has a lot of rich history. This is a temple that was built by the Chimu Indians 1,200 years ago, the largest adobe structure in the world, and I got to tour it. And I've actually toured it several times, and I love going there. I'm like, wow. And this is the Señor de Sipan. This was a guy that was buried in a pyramid there in a place called Chiclayo, Peru. And I just want to call your attention to a few things. If you look, you'll notice he's in the middle with all the gold ornaments and what have you. They say that he reigned about 800 years after Christ. So around the time of that Charlemagne was crowned the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, this guy was reigning in Chiclayo, Peru. And notice the people that are buried with him. At his head is a female body. They believe that's his wife because she's buried at his head. At his feet, there are two bodies. You can only see one, but underneath that, there's another one. Those are also female bodies. So they believe that those were his concubines because they're not buried at the head, they're buried at the feet. And I like to tell people, my wife won't allow me to have one of those, but this guy had two of them, and they were buried with him when he died. Okay, on his left-hand side, you can see a guy with a club in his hand, and he was buried. He was probably his top bodyguard that was buried with him. And then on the other side, there's a guy buried with a vest ornament. They believe that was his high priest that was buried with him. And up in the corner, there's a guy that has no feet that's buried there. They cut his feet off, and they're not exactly sure why, but they speculate it's because they had a belief in the afterlife, and they believed that these people would accompany him in the afterlife. And they believed that the tomb would possibly be robbed. So to keep it from being robbed, they cut this guy's feet off. So throughout eternity, he'd have to stay there and guard the tomb. Interesting, but a point is, look at how many people had to die to bury this guy. Okay, 3 women and 3 men, 6 people. So if you were married to this guy, or if you were his concubine, you would pray, man, let me die before he does, because if you outlive him, when he dies, you get killed to be buried with him, okay? We got to explore ice caves. This was my daughters and I and my wife, back when they were, just got there. This was our first year in Peru, and we took a family vacation. We explored an ice cave at 15,000 feet above sea level. And I've been back several times, and so that was a special time of bonding with our daughters. I love hiking. In fact, just today I was hiking Crowder's Mountain, and always enjoy the opportunity to do that. Well, I've always wanted to hike in the Amazon, and now as a missionary, I've had the opportunity multiple occasions to take a hike in the Amazon. Usually it's with a purpose. I'm usually got a pastor with me. The guy behind me with no shirt on that looks kind of like Tarzan, he's actually Pastor Brigido. He pastors in that area. And he was taking me to an Ashenica village to meet with an Ashenica girl and try to convince her to come to our Bible college. And we took a several-hour hike through the jungle to get there. And on the way, we passed this snake this isn't the exact snake, but it was a snake like this, a very bright fluorescent green snake. And Pastor Brigido, who's a Shenika, so he knows the jungle like the back of his hand, he said, "Did you see that snake?" And we were on a path that was about half the size of this aisle here. And there was brush on both sides, and the snake crossed the path and was in the brush there on the other side. And he's like, "Did you see that snake? Did you see it?" And I was like, yeah. He said, "You know what we call that snake?" I said, "No." He said, "We call it the culebra de tres pasos." The culebra de tres pasos, that would mean the three-stepper snake. And I was like, "Why do you call it the three-stepper snake?" And he said, "Because if it bites you, you take 3 steps and you drop. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. It's over." Here in the States, if you get bit by a water moccasin, a rattlesnake, a copperhead, you've got a couple of hours to get medical attention. This guy here bites you, you better just pray and say Jesus, because that's the only time you've got, and it's over. So I got to see that, and I thought, wow, how cool is that I get to see stuff like that. This is the Ashenika girl in the black blouse to the left. Her father became a Christian and started a church in his village. This, incidentally, behind me is the house. They're standing in the house. It's the kitchen area. This table that you see here, that's the kitchen area. Upstairs, there's like some planks there, and they sleep in the upper part. And very simple structure, but the whole village has 50 to 100 people living in a place like this. And so he became a Christian and started sharing the gospel with the people in his village and got a church planted there, and they got a burden to reach the other villages. On the particular river that they're on, which is a tributary to the Amazon called the Peaches River, there are 120 Ashenika villages. This was the first one that was reached with the gospel. And so I made a trip there with Pastor Brigido to try and convince his daughter to come to the Bible school so that we could train her and then send her to more Ashenika villages. And sure enough, she came to the Bible college, and she saw her first stoplight when she was in Lima. I had never seen a stoplight. She had never had an ice cream cone. My daughters took her out for ice cream. And I'll never forget it, because they told me that they ate the ice cream and she loved it. She loved the ice cream. And when she got down to the bottom, she was like sticking her tongue way down in the cone trying to get the rest of the ice cream. And my daughter started eating the cone, and she's like, "Oh, you eat that?" She didn't even know that you eat the ice cream cone. But she was a very good student, and sure enough, 3 years later when she graduated, she went back into the jungle region and has been planting churches in the Ashenika villages, and we now have 20 churches, 20 villages that have churches on this village. And just this last year, one of the fruits of those churches, a girl named Luce, she's another Ashenika girl, and she studied, and she's actually doing her internship this year, and then she'll come back in November and graduate. And what is she doing? She's helping to plant more churches on the Peaches River in these Ashenika villages. And guess what? You are playing a part of that, because you're supporting missionaries, educators that are training these people to do these things, okay? And then I always like to mix business with pleasure. Okay, I've already told you I came here to do ministry, but on my way here, I stopped off at Crowder's Mountain to do a little hike, okay? And I try to do the same thing everywhere I go. And so this is Pastor Tracy. He pastors the Seneca, a Church of God in Seneca, and him and I became very close friends, and he's a very gifted teacher, and he comes to Peru almost every year to teach a class for us. And when we were in Colombia, he would come pretty much every year to teach a class or to do a seminar for the pastors. This last year, he came twice, once to Peru and once to Colombia. So this was one time when he came to Peru, and we hiked the Colca Canyon, which at that time was the deepest canyon in the world. Unfortunately, they found one that's even deeper now. But this was so we were hiking one of the deepest canyons in the world, much deeper than the Grand Canyon. And it was a 3-day hike, and we had a ball. So we taught a group of pastors for several days. Then we did this trip. And on the trip, we got to see condors. I got to see a volcano shooting off smoke. Thankfully, it was just smoke and no lava. And I thought to myself, man, how blessed am I to be a missionary that I get to see this? Just some nobody from the streets of Chicago. Barely able to read my high school diploma when I graduated. 2 years of college without even buying the books. I didn't buy the books because I wouldn't be able to read them. And God was able to turn my life around and make me a missionary and give me opportunities to see stuff like this. I'm like, wow. This is one of my favorite stories. This is Esau. You see him up there. We're climbing a waterfall in the high jungle region of Peru, a place called Tingo Maria. It's a series of 15 waterfalls, and you climb them. Most of them you just climb up by hand, and it's very exhilarating because the water's rushing down as you're climbing. Some of them are a little complicated, and so we had this guide going with us. And I don't believe in evolution, but if I did, this guy would have been the missing link because he was like 12 years old, and he could scale up that waterfall like he was a monkey. And then he would have a rope with him, and he'd tie the rope around a tree and throw it down, and we'd climb up. So here I am with Esau. Esau at this time was 15 years old. When Esau was 12, his father, who was a Church of God pastor, was martyred by the Shining Path terrorist group. There was a terrorist group that wreaked havoc in Peru during the 80s and 90s. They targeted pastors because pastors spoke out against their atrocities, discouraged young people from joining the ranks. And so they marked pastors, and they threatened Esau's father and told him to quit the ministry and to leave town. He didn't go. He stayed. They brutally murdered him, cut him up into pieces, and threw the pieces off of a cliff. Esau heard this news, and it was kind of the last straw. When he was a 18-month-old baby, he fell into a pot of boiling beans. This was way up in the mountains, very rustic, rural area. And he fell into a pot of beans, and 3/4 of his body was burned. When we met him, his arm was actually like webbed like this, so he couldn't lift his arm. And then later in life, his sister died, and then his father was brutally murdered. And when his father was murdered at 12 years old, Esau went up to the top of a hill one day, and he looked up to heaven, and he said, God, I don't know what I ever did to get on your bad side. And I don't know why anyone would choose to serve you. But you can forget about me. I will never serve you. That was when he was 12. When he was 13, my wife and I arrived in Peru. And I just so happened to be raised by a single father. So I have a heart for kids that are being raised in a single parent home. I said a single father. I was raised without a father by a single mother. And so I have a heart for kids that are being raised without a father. And so when I learned that Esau had lost his father, I took him under my wing. And we raised the money, first of all, to get the surgery and get that cut out so he could raise his. And when he learned that, he could run, and he found out that he was very athletic. So I started taking him out once a week, every Tuesday. And I taught him how to throw a football. I taught him how to shag flies with a baseball glove. And unfortunately, he never learned that verse that the disciple's not supposed to surpass their master. And in just a short time, he was throwing a much better spiral than I could ever throw. And he was shagging flies better than I could ever do it. And, well, I kept loving on him. And today, he's a pastor. He planted a church, and he's married to a pastor's daughter. And he's serving as our assistant at the Bible College. He's fully bilingual. We taught him English. And paid for him to take English classes. And when we were doing that, we had no idea that he was one day going to be our assistant and be traveling to the States and doing fundraising. We had no idea that he was going to be a pastor one day. And guess what? I love hearing him share his testimony. He says, Wayne tricked me to go into the ministry. I love how he says it. I tricked him because he says he didn't preach at me a lot. He just spent time with me and had fun with me, and he'd take me to eat, and he'd take me on trips, and he was good to me. And eventually I said, man, I want to be like him. I want to be in the ministry. And he came to our Bible college, graduated, and now he's serving as our assistant, and I'm just so proud of him, okay? And I love to row. I love canoeing. I love kayaking. I think when I retire, I told my wife that's one of my requirements. I want to live somewhere where we can get a canoe and go canoeing. And I've always had a dream to canoe on the Amazon in a dugout canoe. I don't know if you know anything about dugout canoes, but they're the canoes that they take out of a log and just dig it out. And the indigenous people have been making them for over 1,000 years. And I've always wanted to canoe on the Amazon in a dugout canoe. And guess what? The Lord gave me the opportunity. And I got to row in an Amazon with this jungle oar that they use. It's much bigger than an oar that we would use. And I thought, man, God, what did I do to earn this favor that I get to, I mean, all my dreams, they're coming true. Another desire I had was I wanted to go whale watching. I don't know if any of you have ever been to SeaWorld and seen like the killer whales and the dolphins jumping around. I love that. I was always fascinated by it, but I always wanted to see them in the wild. Well, guess what? Gloria, the darker-skinned girl there, she studied at our Bible college in Colombia. And when she graduated, she went back to her hometown and fell in love with a pastor there. He was a Nazarene pastor, a guy named Juan, and Gloria and Juan got married. They wanted me to officiate their wedding, and then they were going to go on a honeymoon. So I went there, and I've officiated their wedding, and while I was there, Puerto Bermudez, which is where she lives, wait, I'm mixing up. Puerto Bermudez is in Peru. They live in Buenaventura. So they're in Buenaventura, right on the Pacific Ocean. And I got there, and I learned that the whales were almost in season. There are whales that live in Antarctica, in the Arctic Ocean in south, and that live in the North Arctic Ocean, and they come to the warm equatorial waters once a year to mate. And then they swim back to the cold waters. And it was like 2 weeks before they show up. But they were already doing tours because sometimes people get there, sometimes the whales get there early. So when I found this out, I was like, you guys are going on your honeymoon. Can you put it on hold for a day and let's go see the whales? And so Gloria and Juan came with me. We got into a boat, and I remember the captain telling us, listen, you're probably not going to see any whales, because it's not quite whale season. There's still 2 more weeks. I just want you to know that, because I'm not going to give you a refund if we don't see any whales. And when the boat took off, I prayed, and I said, God, I know you made whales to bring you glory. So let me see them so I can give you glory. And I'm telling you, 20 minutes into the trip, this whole family of whales showed up and started. You know, how many of you have been to SeaWorld and seen the dolphins and the whales? You know how they do the tricks? They flap their hand, they spin around, they flip their back tail, they wave at you. I always thought that the trainers trained them how to do that. No, they do that naturally. These whales were putting on a show for us. They were waving to us. They were spinning around. They were going under and slapping their tail. And they got so close, I would say they got as close as from here to from where I'm at to the screen. And the captain of the boat said, you know, we kind of need to get going because they're starting to get kind of close, and, you know, they could easily tip our boat over. They're not malicious or anything, but they could accidentally do that. So I was like, cool, I got to see him. And I thought to myself, man, I got to see whales in the wild. Why? Because well, 2 reasons. I'm a missionary, and I've got a great wife. Because if I remember correctly, it cost $400 to take that boat ride and go see it. And I remember calling my wife and saying, sweetheart, I've got an opportunity to go see whales, but it's going to cost $400. And most wives would be, $400? Are you out of your mind? And my wife right away said, sweetheart, I know that's always been a dream for you. Do it. Do it. I'm like, man, I won the lottery. So anyway, I got to do that, okay? And I also got to explore a fossil graveyard. My wife and I did a motorcycle trip in Colombia to a place called Villanueva, and there was this fossil graveyard where there were literally millions of fossils buried together. Have you ever noticed when you give your kids a bath and they're dirty, how the water goes down the drain, and then right around the drain there's an accumulation of the sediment or the dirt that came off your kids? You know what I'm talking about? That's what this graveyard looked like. It looked like a bunch of animals floating around, all these bones, and it just deposited as the water was going down the drain, and in that area there's this fossil graveyard. And when I saw it, I'm like, man, this looks like evidence for a flood. Because what I saw was, first of all, this Plesiosaurus fossil. That's Plesiosaurus bones. And if you remember your dinosaurs, the Plesiosaurus was a marine reptile that lived supposedly in the dinosaur period. All right, obviously it lived in the ocean. They also found a Brachiosaurus bone that I'm standing there by, a Brachiosaurus bone. Brachiosauruses lived on land. So we've got land dinosaurs and sea reptiles buried together in the same fossil graveyard, and they're buried catastrophically. They're all mangled up, and they're broken bones and all. I mean, it's like they're buried catastrophically, and it was something so catastrophic that it affected the oceans and the continents, because animals that don't live together are buried together. And I was telling my guy, dude, do you not realize this is evidence for the Genesis flood? That's exactly what the Bible says happened, that there was this humongous catastrophe that affected the oceans and the continents and killed these animals and buried them together. Well, I don't know about that. Well, to me it was clear as day. So I got to see that, okay? And then my wife and I, on her 50th birthday, I got her first motorcycle. She used to ride a motorcycle when she was a teenager, grew up in North Carolina. And so I got her a motorcycle, and she said that it was the best gift I ever got her. Then she started making these trips on motorcycles with some of her church members, because she had planted a church. And she started coming home and showed me the pictures, and I started getting jealous. I was like, man, I need to learn how to ride a motorcycle. So I decided to learn, and we got motorcycles, and we started to realize that this is a very convenient way to get around in Latin America, because it's so cheap. It's much cheaper to purchase a motorcycle, much cheaper, much more economical. So we started helping our graduates get motorcycles. And we'd raise funds to buy motorcycles and help them. And then we started doing motorcycle ministry trips. Once or twice a year, we'd get as many of the students that could come with their motorcycle, and we would go on a trip, and we would purposely go to as many places as we could where we had graduates and see our graduates. And it's always encouraging for graduates to see other graduates and pray together and what have you. So we started doing motorcycle ministry trips, and that was a whole lot of fun. And then I'd like to just tell you real quick, you guys end at what time? 5, right? 4 to 5? Okay. All right. So I'm about finishing up, but I just wanted to share with you, since we're celebrating 25 years in South America, I want to share with you some of the cool opportunities that I got. I'm not an evangelist in any sense of the word. I almost have a hard time sharing the gospel with my neighbor, let alone preaching the gospel to indigenous communities and things like that. So I'm not an evangelist, I'm a missionary educator, but God has given me opportunities. And in the Amazon, there are a group of indigenous people called the Bora Indians, and they live in this very rustic village, and the skirt that you see the chief there wearing, it's made out of tree bark. If you feel it, it's real like rough, it's like almost like burlap. And I hear it's real bad on wedgies. But anyway, if you look real close, yeah, you probably can't see it, but what they do is they do artwork. They make crafts and things out of stuff, cool stuff out of the stuff that they find right there in the jungle. And then when tourists come to the village, they sell it to them. And that's how they make their daily bread and put their kids through school and what have you. So I brought lots of teams there. In fact, I think I might have brought Pastor Robert there when he came down. So I brought a lot of teams that would buy their stuff. I'd always encourage the team, hey, you guys make sure you get something. And so they would buy stuff. And so the Boers started liking me a lot. And so I told them, after about 4 or 5 visits, I talked to the chief, Raphael. I said, listen, I'm coming back here next month, and I'm not coming with any tourists. I'm coming by myself, and I'm bringing my Bible. And I want to share with you guys a message from the Bible. And I really wasn't sure how receptive he would be. And how he would do it. I wasn't even sure if he'd remember. But sure enough, I showed up that day that we had coordinated, and he kept the children out of school to let me share the gospel with them. And I shared a gospel presentation that I got from Franklin Graham, The Bridge, and talked about how we're sinners and we can't get back to God because we're separated from him. We can't get there by our good works or by religion. We can only get there through Jesus, the bridge. And I kind of acted it out with the kids and brought them from one side to the other. And, well, I shared the gospel, and I gave an altar call, and the chief and his wife and their 3 older sons and their wives were the first 8 Boers to give their hearts to the Lord that day. And as a result, we ended up getting a church planted there. And when I went back to Peru, after the 11 years in Colombia, I went back to the Bora village, and sure enough, they're still worshiping in the church there, the Boers. And I'm like, wow, how cool is that? I got to play a part of that. I got to share the gospel basically in an unreached people group and win their first converts. And I remember thinking, man, who am I that I get this opportunity? And then I was given the opportunity to preach at a prison in Lima that has a reputation for being one of the most notorious prisons in the world. There are over 10,000 inmates and like 100 guards. So it's a very dangerous place. And I was invited to go there and share with the group of believers there. They're divided up into different cells, and each cell has a church, and they all get together in the courtyard. And I got to go there, and I was amazed because when I showed up, they met me at the gate, the entrance gate, and they surrounded me. I almost felt like Billy Graham. I'm like, wow, they surrounded me, and they walked with me all the way through all these courtyards until they got me to the place where they're, and I asked them, why you guys surround me like that? And he says, well, see those towers up there? I was like, yeah, that's where the guards are. See all these inmates down here? That's where they are. If you were here by yourself, we can't guarantee you're going to get there. We're here to protect you. And I was like, well, thank you very much. But anyway, I got there, and I shared a gospel message with them and a word of encouragement for those who were believers. And you can see that fence out there in the background. A bunch of inmates came in. They were kind of like making fun of the gringo. Who's this gringo think that he is? And before it was over, they were coming inside and sitting down and listening. And I thought, how cool is that, that I would get an opportunity to preach the gospel in one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. And again, I just want to remind you, I'm a Doan nobody. I was the black sheep of my family, one of 7 brothers and sisters, and I would have been the least likely to succeed, the least likely to make something out of his life, the least likely to have a lasting marriage. And yet God saved me when I was 3 days before my 20th birthday, 44 years ago yesterday. And he turned my life around. And I've just had some fantastic opportunities. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I think that's it. I also, when I was in Bible college and I'd sit at chapel, I always wanted to preach in chapel. Every so often they'd invite a former student. They'd say, this is one of our alumni and he's preaching here. And I was like, oh man, I hope I get to preach in chapel one day. Well, guess what? We're running a Bible college. I get to preach in chapel whenever I want to. And so the Lord, again, gives me the desires of our heart. And then I also had the opportunity to share some apologetic seminars. I was an atheist before I became a Christian. And so I've just got a strong interest in evidence that backs up the credibility of the Christian faith. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Acts chapter 1, verse 3, that says, after he suffered, he appeared to his apostles and gave many infallible proofs that he had risen from the dead. Many convincing proofs that he was alive. And I like that verse because it shows me God is interested in evidence. If he wasn't interested in evidence, Jesus wouldn't have given many infallible or convincing proofs that he was alive. So I've made it a lifelong study to learn these evidences. It's called apologetics, Christian evidence, and I love studying it. Actually written some books on it, and I had the opportunity to teach a group of principals, public school principals, in an entire region called Ucayali. And I got to teach them the archaeological evidence for the credibility of the Bible. And once again, I was like, man, who am I, Lord, that you gave me this opportunity? And so I think that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I really enjoyed being here with you. I enjoy coming every year. I'd like to say it's just for you, but I also like that meal that's coming. Thank you for your faithful support. And we've got, quite a few minutes left. If anybody has a question that they'd like to ask, A lot of times we do questions and answers. Yes.
So is your birthday Friday?
My birthday is Friday.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
And I'll be 64 years old and loving it. Okay? I'm digging my 60s. Got some great, wonderful grandchildren and a wonderful wife. And so not only am I going to have a happy birthday, I'm having a happy life.
I'd like to say I love the shows.
Thank you. Did you see the back of it? Yeah. All hand done.
The last time that you were here, you had some kind of jacket or something that went over your head.
A poncho, right.
My husband wanted that thing so bad I couldn't stand it.
Is this your husband here?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I want one of those. I want one of those.
Okay. If you give me your address, I'll try to get you one. All right? Okay.
You mentioned the teaching at leading for public school principals. I work in a public school here, and so talk just a little bit about obviously they were receptive to you speaking to them about God and teaching to them about Christian principles and such. Talk a little bit about the climate there as far as.
Okay, well, basically, the way that opportunity opened up is a guy named David Flores. He was a teacher when I first got to Peru, and he invited me to teach. He was a science teacher. He invited me to teach in his science class in a public school. Then he became a principal, and he would invite me to come and teach for his teachers at his school, in a public school. Then we went to Colombia, and during our time in Colombia, he continued to get promoted. Now he's the Minister of Education for the entire state. And so he's the one who gives me these opportunities. And I'm just like so glad I have this relationship with him, because that's like I love being able to do something like that. And the interesting thing is, when he introduced me to his principals, you could see them rolling their eyes when he says he's going to talk to you about the archaeological evidence that backs up the credibility of the Bible. And I could see him like, what's this ignorant, closed-minded Christian going to tell us about archaeology and the Bible? Come on. And before the presentation was over, you could see him lighten up. You could see him like, wow. And several of them came up to me afterwards, shaking my hand, saying, man, I did not know this. That was just very enlightening. And a couple of them even asked, would you be willing to come to my school and teach it at my school? So to me, it was a great opportunity. And I'm planning on going back to Pucallpa this year, which is where David Flores lives, and I'm hoping that he'll give me some more teaching opportunities. He also opened an opportunity for me to teach in the university on another trip. I taught in the university with a group of students on creation science, which is one of my favorite subjects, because I was a diehard evolutionist, and so I love creation science, and I got to do it in an auditorium full of mixed. Some of them were Christians, some of them were non-Christians, and some even professors were there. In fact, one time I got to teach in the very auditorium that Dr. Guzman, who started the Shining Path terrorist group. He had studied in Russia, he became a communist, and he started this communist terrorist group that was responsible for killing Esau's father that I told you about. He started it in that auditorium, teaching the students his atheistic communist doctrine. And out of that was birthed the Shining Path terrorist group. I got to go to that same auditorium and do a presentation on creation science. And I was like, wow, how cool is that? So yes, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
There's got to be different languages. How do you go about teaching other people?
Okay, well, the cool thing about Peru is there's multiple languages. You got the Bora language, the Ashenica language, the Shipibo language, the Quechua language, but Spanish is the #1 language, and almost everybody is bilingual. So when I go to the Bora community, I don't have to learn the Bora language. I can talk to them in Spanish. And now there's some older Boras that don't understand, and they'll sit next to somebody who kind of tells them what I'm saying. So my wife and I are both fluent in Spanish, and so we can teach in Spanish, and they understand it. So good question. And I'm very, very thankful. On a regular basis, I thank God. Thank you, God, that you've never sent me somewhere where I have to learn another language. Because I wasn't even good at English. So the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life was learn a second language. And I've known some missionaries that served all their life in Latin America, and in the closing years of their life, the Lord sent them to Haiti, and they had to learn Creole. or the Lord sends them somewhere else and have to learn a language, like, please, God, please don't send me somewhere else. So, okay, anybody else? All right, I think we're done. If you think of another question, see me at supper time, and I'll be glad to try and answer it for you. I love you all and appreciate your faithful support to us.